my question to you, just historically speaking, like what had kept you at a certain point from saying, you know what, I want to be the one that helps decide policy for this particular neighborhood, area, community. What kept you from doing that? Just out of curiosity.
I don't know, lack of ambition.
Oh,
I mean, I like. I mean, I like organizing.
Yeah.
Better than vote for me.
Yeah.
Now I don't put any. I mean, I worked closely with Diane Ragsdale all through these years.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, I'm getting ready to tell that story, but it just temperamentally, I just couldn't do it. I just didn't like it. I've written speeches for many city council members. I've done research for many of them over the years. But just the idea of vote for me, I just couldn't do it.
I think the influence on the outside, I would say, for us, like somebody like yourself does have influence. And I like to think about yourself, Mr. Ragsdale, and Mr. Tave as well, kind of influence that you guys have had on the process dealing with this part. And I've kind of told folks privately and publicly that I feel like things began to kind of wheel in our favor once you guys came in and was willing to use your network and influence certain people. And I see if it passes, which I'm hoping that it does. If it passes, I'm grateful. If it don't pass, I'm still grateful because we've got a kind of a classroom situation where we saw, because folks always say there's not no elders in the community. The elders don't really do this and that. And I've been a person, the way I was raised and the kind of experiences that I'm seeing now and coming up, that there are elders who do lend a hand when there's an opportunity to do so. So, that's kind of I kind of get what you're saying as an organizer. You can be sometimes stronger than that. But do you have a question, Gordon?
Oh no, I don't have one right now.
But no, that was my question. I just wanted to know.
Well, let me just share with you this. When I was doing a lot of the work in the 70s and 80s, I would have been 30 in 1982. So I was working with Elsie Faye Higgins and Lipscomb, and Diane and I are the same age. And the guy that, besides Charlie Young, the person that influenced me the most was probably Miss Higgins and J.B. Jackson.
J.B. Jackson, right?
And they were really grassroots, and they were really for the people. And they did something that no one else had done, and that is they brought a whole community to City Hall. What was called District 6 back then was South Dallas, Fair Park proper. And they mobilized that community, and they delivered for that community. But it was struggle all the way. But so we were working with elders at that time, people I'm much older than they were when I met them now. But I mean, I always tell my wife, if I could have stayed young and handsome man, I would have done it. But anyway, so we're working on that kind of housing, stopping displacement, And so we began to see citywide how this worked. We were close to downtown on the east side. And Diane Ragsdale's little neighborhood, Wheatley Place, was close to downtown, just south of Fair Park, and another neighborhood over there called the Lower Peaks Branch neighborhood. And then in West Dallas, you had the neighborhood on both sides of Singleton, and then you had the huge, massive public housing project that was 1,000 units were vacant at the time. It was a 3,000 unit property. And so we began, and then on the north side, you had what the old people call Short North Dallas, but the real estate developers call State Thomas after the
Thomas and Hall.
Yeah, Thomas and Hall area. And of course, that was a historic black neighborhood, but you hardly find a black person over there now, because they all got displaced.
Right.
And so anyway, so we looked at it, and we said, okay, here's what's happening. We're being gentrified out in East Dallas. In South Dallas, Interstate 45, the street I drove out here on tonight, went over a neighborhood and crashed everything underneath it. And Miss Higgins' house was like one house away from that freeway going by. And she had a big 2-story house. And if it had just moved over a little bit, it would have taken her house out, and God knows what would have happened maybe to that movement, you know. But they were so callous at that time. They wanted to put the freeway over people's houses and have them live under it. Wow. You know, it was pretty bad, you know. But anyway, so it was like massive public works, and then behind where I forgot the name of it now, but where it used to be Starplex, right, where behind the Cotton Bowl over there, that was all houses. There was 40 acres of houses there, and that was called the Fair Park Homeowners Expansion. And the Fair Park Homeowners, this took place between 1968 and about 1988. They were just all shoved out, and that's where JB was down there. He owned some property down there, but then he got to organizing down there with Miss Higgins. And when Peter Johnson first came to Dallas, he went over there. That's who he met. And so they were all working down there at the Fair Park Homeowners Association. And anyway, so we said, okay, this was Diane and me and probably Charlie Young and a few others. We said, let's go around to each neighborhood, find the active neighborhood group, and let's do a citywide coalition to stop displacement. We've got it analyzed. We know how many people were kicked out of here. The thousands, really, you know. And because we were looking at the census between 60 and 70, and then between 70 and 80. And you could see the drop off in the population per census tract, you know. But when you're going through it, especially if you're for it, like a city council member trying to clear out a poor neighborhood for some reason, the scale of it isn't as visible. But when we saw the difference in who lived there in 1960 and who lived there in 1970 and then who lived there in 1980, you could see that it was tens of thousands of people that had been moved out of this neighborhood. That was in South Dallas, and it was even worse in West Dallas. So in West Dallas, you had disinvestment, okay? Like the public housing, they didn't keep it up, and so they boarded it up. And then you also had regular bad housing conditions out there, because you had this one horrible landlord out there. Oh God, what was his name? Wheeler. You drive out Singleton, you'd see Wheeler Lumber. And that was where Mr. Wheeler lived, and all around, he owned 250 houses out there probably. Wow. And he was bad. He's a pretty bad landlord. If he wasn't called an animal, he probably should have been. You know? But anyway, so we began to do this, and we ended up with about 10 or 12 groups that got interested in it. Right. And those groups ended up forming the first community development corporation in Dallas in 1982. It was called Common Ground. And Diane was our first board president, and I was the executive director. $100 a week, you know, big time job, you know. But we all worked for nothing back then, and we had cheap housing, and so we could do it, you know. And we began to acquire abandoned and condemned houses and fix it up. And we kept that thing going. From 82 to 98, we expanded. From 98 till we shut down in 2020, we contracted. I mean, we never had enough money to run it. And, but we did do about 150 houses, you know, and they all were houses that would have been bulldozed. And it was kind of a novel way to do it. If a house was going to be bulldozed on Hall Street in North Dallas, you know, like around for North Central Expressway or something, we would pick it up and take it to a vacant lot in some other neighborhood, you know. And so we were sort of recycling these houses that can't possibly be built for this price anymore. And then we were also just trying to illustrate that, look, you don't have to tear down a house that needs repaired just because it's in your way. You know, you could fix it up. Right. And we were fixing houses in the 80s for, be like $2,500 for the plumbing, $2,000 for the foundation, $2,000 for the roof. I mean, it came in at around $10,000, you know. And so we would get that much donated, and then we would either rent it or sell it to the people, you know. Wow. And so that was what came out of all that study and displacement and figuring all that out. And then the other thing we did, So this was the idea, was that we would agitate for policy change, and we would create a program to illustrate what we were talking about that would also have benefits for the people who got the houses. You know? Mm-hmm. And so following the Panthers, the next thing we worked on was starting the East Dallas Community School, which we started in the summer of 1978. We had like 9 parents and 12 kids when we started. And we based it on a Montessori school model. It was completely integrated because the neighborhood was integrated, you know. It was racially integrated neighborhood. Although when I first met the Patriots, most of the people, it was considered a white working class group, you know. And a lot of the older people were older whites that had worked at the Ford plant before it closed down right there on the freeway. And before that, a lot of them had worked on the railroads. Like when I remember in 78, I met some older people older than me now, who had been in the Wobblies, the International Workers of the World. That was the famous left-wing union. You know about them, right? And the bosses would say IWW stands for I won't work, you know, because they were always going on strike, you know. But so that's the kind of people that were over there. They were just too cool, you know.
Right.
And so I should tell you more about the evolution of Charlie Young, but everything that I know about being an organizer, I learned from Charlie Young. He was grounded. He would knock on anybody's door and draw them into a conversation and just start like that. And that's how we learned to do it. And we would go take this newspaper around, you know, and pass it out.
What is it called?
Of course, the People's Voice, you know. And the first one was a tenant newsletter called Four Walls. So it changed over the years. But anyway, so we started the school in the summer. Every Tuesday we would take the kids to the zoo or just whatever, you know, and then teach them a little something. And then we that fall, the parents said, well, we don't want to go back to school. Their kids were like 6 years old, 7 years old. They didn't want to go back to Mount Auburn Elementary School. And Terry Ford, who helped start the school, who started it, and I helped her, let's put it that way. She said, well, I'll just quit my job. And so she quit her job and became the teacher, the main teacher at the school. And then we'd also opened a printing company. We thought a small printing company might support the activism. That didn't really work out because a small printer doesn't make that much money, you know, besides paying his, you know, running a business, you know. But we did print a lot of, you know, we could do all our own printing and stuff like that.
Right.
But anyway, so we had the print shop, and there was a guy that wanted to learn to be an offset printer. And he had been trained as a Montessori teacher. So he said, I'll work for y'all if you teach me how to print.
Right.
And the print shop and the first place we had the school were pretty close together over on Peak Street. And so that worked out pretty good. And that school is still going today. It wasn't as hard to raise money for a school as it was for agitation and more militant sounding things.
The school was a lot easier.
A lot easier to raise money for, yes. And so now we have a Head Start program, and we still have our school in East Dallas. At one point we had 3 schools, but we'd either lose the lease or the parents would lose interest, or we just couldn't sustain it, you know. We tried being a charter school for a while, and that was good because you could get money from the state, you know, for the students. But it was bad because you had to you couldn't do it was very difficult to do the kind of teaching we wanted to do, and for each kid to pass the right test at the right time, you know. And that's generally in Montessori. You get the payoff in Montessori a little bit later than you get tested, you know. And plus there's a lot of bureaucracy. I mean, I always thought they told you, well, a charter school, they don't have much bureaucracy, but that's wrong. The only thing about a charter school is that you don't have to have certified teachers, that's the one rule I'd rather have, you know. But anyway, so we kept that charter for 20 years, and then we gave it back. Surrendered is what they call it, you know, left in good standing. And so we just focused in on early childhood education, like birth to age 9. And then at Head Start, it's an early childhood Head Start, so it's birth to 3 or something like that. that school, though, is out by Love Field. It's north of Love Field in a mainly immigrant area. So anyway, the idea was we would agitate and then we would build alternative institutions. We would agitate and we'd build, you know. And the Boat Ark Patriots in Dallas, as far as I know, were not affiliated with any other of the groups around the country that use the term patriots. Because there were like some progressive whites around the country that were using, like we were, the word patriot, you know. And Charlie would say, well, we call ourselves the patriots because we're for the people, you know, and just try to turn it back on them. And, but we were like the group that in Chicago, you know, when the Panthers led a sort of what they called a rainbow coalition. And they got the whites that were in Uptown, the Appalachia area, right? And the common ground was housing, right? We did the same thing here. Charlie was good friends with Ernie McMillan. I met all them through him, you know. Ernie McMillan, Fahim Minka, Beasley, Charlie Paul, I forgot what his Khalif Hassan, Skip Shockley, all of them. And so, and then we also knew Juan Perez and the Brown Berets. And so you have a situation where we would come together on issues a lot, you know. One particular one was a big march against the Ku Klux Klan in 1979. There was about, I don't know, a small chapter here, you know. Back in it was a big Ku Klux Klan town in the 30s. But this was in 1979, and the Klan announced they were going to have a march downtown. And so we decided we would have a counter march. And we, at first it was called the March for Human Decency, and then one evening, this was one contribution I made to that march besides going to it, was I said, you know, that sounds kind of like an anti-pornography group. Why don't we call it the March for Human Dignity? And that's what that's the march that came. And we had like, you know, 5,000 people. Wow. This was the same, it was one of the biggest marches I'd seen in Dallas until they started the One Way with Jesus marches that they had here, you know. And it was completely peaceful. And it was the day of the Greensboro shootings, if you know that. There were some activists that were doing an anti-Klan protest in Greensboro, North Carolina. And the Klan came and shot 3 or 4 of them, maybe 5. I can't remember how many. But you can just Greensboro shootings and it'll come up. The same day, it was all peaceful. And of course, the Klan, they had to cut their march short. You know, the cops could hardly protect them. But anyway, and that was there's a good example of the Dallas way in that story. There was a guy named Ernest Hayward, and he was the president of the Dallas Black Chamber, and so Chamber of Commerce. And so the mayor at the time, who was a real sleazebag named Robert Folsom, asked him to come to us and get us to cancel the march, and then they would have Dallas Unity Day. And so we said, no, I don't think so. Dallas Unity Day, because we're not even united, you know. I mean, we're united, but you all aren't. You're all united, but not with us, you know. And so he had to report back, you know, that he couldn't make that happen. And he left maybe a year or so later. I guess he wasn't doing what they wanted him to do. And he felt bad about it himself. You could tell when he was at the table trying to talk us out of it, you know. But anyway, so in a lot of these, the things I'm talking about, I was a foot soldier. In some, I was in a leadership position. Now, here's something about organizing. You all already know this, but I'm just going to tell it as an illustration.
We don't know anything. Please.
No, you do. Because Diane and I went out to West Dallas to talk about displacement. And this was like in 1981, maybe, you know. And I had never spent much time out there. I knew what was out there. And I knew that Ruth Jefferson had lived out there, and some of the, you know, the Panthers had a pest control thing out there. But we went out there to a pretty big neighborhood meeting, and we pitched them on displacement, and I shared with them, you know, the form we were seeing in different parts of town. And a guy named Reverend D.L. Burrell stood up and he said, you know, that's a good idea, but we're being poisoned by a lead smelter. How about helping us with that? And so, you know, an organizer's like, okay, you have your idea what you want to do, but the people have their own wisdom about what they really need done, right? And so we brought them into the coalition that started they were called the West Dallas, I don't know, West Dallas Neighborhood Group, maybe somehow. We brought them into the coalition to form Common Ground, the CDC. And then I said, okay, I'll help with the lead, you know. And I worked on that thing for the next like 3 or 4 years. We got an order to shut it down. And then we started working on another lead smelter that was down on Pontiac Street in the bottom, just across this Corinth Bridge in Oak Cliff. And how did we get those shut down? The head of the EPA at that time was Ann Burford, but her real name, her full name was Ann Gorsuch Burford. And her son is now on the Supreme Court, Neil Gorsuch.
Okay. I knew I heard
Yeah, that'll show you how tight that ruling class is, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, so how are we going to shut it down? We started doing a lot of protests, you know, in-your-face protests, deep research, and organizing. That was our 3 things, always. So I went down to try to find out. I just got an idea one day. We had to get a specific use permit, plus have the proper zoning to open our school, right? So I thought, okay, if we need a use permit for a daycare center, basically, surely you need a use permit to run a lead smelter.
Right.
So I went down, I knew they needed industrial 3 zoning, and I'm looking at the zoning map, and I don't see a specific use permit overlay on this site. And man, I just went, oh my God, they don't have one, you know. And I thought, I'm not even telling anybody. I wanted to just rip the zoning thing up and take it with me so they wouldn't change it, you know. Because back then, when you looked at a zoning map back then, there'd be all kind of scribbles on it, like the new owner and stuff. You know. It was like in the 19th century or something, you know. And that's how we ended up closing those lead smelters. Remember I told you, if you have a use that's not with the proper zoning, it's a non-conforming use, right? It doesn't conform to the zoning code. And since they didn't have the permit, that meant that they were an illegal use. And not that they could be shut down, but they had to be shut down once we started filing a complaint. And so with the one in West Dallas, they ended up through a bunch of new corporate owners and stuff shutting down anyway. But for the one called Dixie Metals of all, you know, of course, it took to the end of the 1980s to shut that. They gave them an amortization period that ended on January 1st, 1990. And so, you know, they had 6 more years to run, but they did get shut down. So it just shows you how you can do one thing to do another, you know, sort of. And that's why I say those are our 3 main things: research, protest, and organizing. And nowadays, with half the world being online, you know, you can organize more easily around what you might call a community of interest. Right. You know, like all the people, like the Mega March or something, you know, you read about online, and they come from everywhere, right? But we were grounded in neighborhood organizing, which is really place-based. And that's what I see kind of y'all doing out here. Both are good, you know, both are good. But sometimes I'll joke and say, before the internet, we would print up a leaflet and pass out 100 leaflets and 10 people would come to the meeting. After the internet, we sent out a blast of 3,000 people and 10 come to the meeting. So it's the Roman rulers had it down for ruling. Bread and circuses, you know, give them just enough and distract them, you know, and then here's you come knocking on the door. Yeah. Hey, you know, this landlord's terrible. We want to do something about it. And then maybe 1 in 5 will say, well, yeah, if I don't get kicked out, you know. Yeah. And so that's just organized. You know, you can't, and you don't have the church. And we did a lot of church-based organizing. But to try to, for church, you know, you've got, hey, he told us to do it. You know it's right. And, so you have a little more leverage, you know, than just. But the best thing I remember in organizing, and I use it as a precinct chair now, is I say, hey, I'm John Fullinwider, and I just live right over there on Fuller Street.
Right.
And I get them to picture that in their mind, and then I say, and I'm also the Democratic precinct chair.
Right.
And that's how we used to do it. And the best, because you don't have any credibility knocking on someone's door. They don't even want to be bothered. You know?
Exactly.
And so sometimes I'd say, you're on the intercom, you know, almost. I'm not a religious fanatic. I'm not a bill collector. I'm just your friendly neighborhood organizer, and I wanted to talk to you about the mayor, you know, something like that. And just try to get that door open. It's hard. It's hard.
You got anything?
Yeah, I need to use that the other day. It was I could have used that the other day.
It can be really discouraging, you know.
Times, yeah.
But, you know, one thing about the main thing in organizing is stay in power.
Say it again.
Stay in power.
Staying power.
Stay in power.
Stay empowered.
Staying power. In other words, you stay with it
Oh.
year
Same
after
building.
year. And finally, you know, 3 years in, somebody says, who was that guy, Belogan? Let's go
Yeah,
find
Belogan.
him.
Yeah,
Let's go find him. Let's go find him. And then you get, you know, you can do something with it. I know we're getting to the end of my time here. I'll just say how most of the people in the Patriots were active from 73 to about 85, 86.
Wow, that's a good run.
And when the group sort of faded out, I mean, the Patriots, we never had a membership list, because back then the cops would try to get your membership list, you know.
Right.
And we kept it pretty tight. But in order to do programs, we would start nonprofit corporations. Like East Dallas Community School was its own nonprofit corporation. And then the print shop was just a business. And then Common Ground, the Community Development Corporation, was a nonprofit corporation. And so we never had, we were kind of, if you knew us, you knew us. But we weren't really an institution. We ran the survival programs. We ran it off of a corporation called Community People for Self-Determination, you know. And so we just, that way there was nothing to seize in the Bodark Patriots, you know. And we were just an organizing group, which legally is just an unaffiliated association of individuals, you know. And a couple of years I worked as a Vista volunteer a couple of years, because we were a site. We could get Vista volunteers, which is like AmeriCorps.
Okay.
But they don't do organizing anymore, you know. Of course, probably don't do anything anymore now. But anyway, so we would find different ways to fund what we were doing.
Right.
We would sometimes we took on, we didn't ever do anything like A-Man, but we had a lot of the elderly people were getting their purse snatches and stuff. And so we got a grant to set up a community crime program. But it wasn't like a crime watch, it was just an organizing program that we organized the neighborhood association, the East Dallas Neighborhood Association. And they would have like telephone trees if someone was in trouble, you know, and they'd call. And then we had a youth employment program. And then we bought a van with most of the grant money and just drove the women to Minyards.
Right.
And drove them home. Minyards, yeah. And drove them home. And it turned out pretty good. The city council tried to get the grant stopped because it was a federal grant, but they couldn't. And so there was a big deal, like, did they cause purse snatching to go down? And we weren't really sure. Anecdotally, we knew we had.
Wow.
But when we got the police's reports, it had gone down. So we were like, yeah, you know.
Yeah.
And we didn't care. We cared, but I mean, we knew the program was a success for what it had done.
How many years did you guys do that?
We ran at a couple, 70, I don't know, maybe 2 years. We got it renewed once. So. But it was, we'd take on anything if the people in the neighborhood wanted us to do it. Unless it was something, you know, like, hey, we don't want subsidized housing here. We would say, well, wait a minute, you know, they're just like us, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so that's how, that's the Bodark Patriots in a nutshell. There's a lot of other really funny and cool things I could tell you, you know, that they did. that we did. And like, here's an example of in-your-face protests from the 70s and one from the 90s.
Okay.
Okay. Charlie Young, we had a rat infestation problem in the East Dallas apartments. And infestation means like they're everywhere, man. You know, harborage would mean like you leave food out and they come out and get it. But infestation is for the landlord. That's their problem. They need to exterminate, right? So the city council was getting ready to pass a law that made the tenants responsible for infestation. So Charlie said, okay, let's get something to scare these people. They don't have to deal with rats. So we began, I say we, but this is before my time. But he began to collect rats and got a big cage and put it in the office and invited the television out there. There was only 3 television stations back then. They all came. And he said, look, you know, we got so many rats over here that we're going to have to relocate these rats. And we're going to start with the streets that the mayor and the city council live on.
Ooh.
And so if they pass this law, we're going to begin the rat relocation program. So that was a shocker in itself, right?
Yeah, it is.
But then the print shop, we printed up some leaflets that showed a hobo looked like a rat, and it said North Dallas, and it said rats coming to your street, and passed it out on those same streets where the council and the mayor lived. And man, the next week they killed that ordinance.
I bet
They
you
killed it.
did.
Okay, here's one from the 90s that I was involved in.
That's dope.
We were in the middle of a homeless campaign. People living under the I-45 bridge near downtown.
Okay.
And they wanted to clear them all out because the World Cup soccer was coming in that year. This is 94.
Wow.
And
You were just born.
96.
96.
96.
I wouldn't have thought of it.
nah, your parents are thinking about you.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we were organizing protests under the bridge, and we held a hearing down there, and we did all kind of stuff. And one day the mayor, but we weren't getting anywhere. They were still all going to be evicted. And the mayor announced he was going to come down under the bridge and meet with the people.
Okay.
And so we said, okay, we'll meet you. And we made a big banner and hung it from the bridge, and it said, forgive us our trespasses, because they were going to arrest everybody for trespassing.
Right.
And so he got wind of that, and he said he would not come down because there might be violence. And so a reporter came down to tell us, and we said, And so I asked people if they wanted to go to the mayor's office. And hell yeah, you know. And so they all jumped in my truck. I was a pickup truck. We filled the cab and filled the back, had about a dozen people. And we were heading down to City Hall.
Yeah.
And everyone's so excited. A fight breaks out in the back of the bus, back of the truck. And I had to pull over, and then we had to decide which one's going to leave because they're not going to be able to work together. So one guy left, and the other guy stayed. And so we go. City Hall was a lot more open back then.
Yeah.
And like,
no security check. No, you just walk straight in.